The invitation arrived at 9 in the morning, slipped between emails about deadlines and client calls, disguised as something warm. Dinner tonight. Anniversary. Don't be late, my mother wrote. No heart emoji. No details. Just an expectation. I stared at the message longer than I should have. My parents' anniversary dinners were never about celebration. They were performances, carefully staged moments where my sister sparkled effortlessly and I blended into the background, useful only when something needed fixing or paying for. Still, I replied okay out of habit, out of that old reflex that told me family obligations came before personal comfort. I was 25 now, living on my own, paying my own bills, earning my own money. Yet one text from my mother could still tighten my chest like a string being pulled. Work ran late that evening. A client presentation dragged on, followed by traffic that refused to move. I checked the time again and again, sending a brief apology message I knew would be ignored. When I finally reached the restaurant, a place far too expensive for a casual family dinner, I smoothed my blazer and stepped inside, already rehearsing my apology. That was when I saw the table. Empty plates. Folded napkins. Wine glasses smeared with the last traces of celebration. They had already eaten. My mother looked up first, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're late," she said brightly, as if I'd arrived to a surprise party. "We just finished." My sister laughed, leaning back in her chair. Typical. I stood there, blinking, trying to understand. Then my mother added, almost cheerfully, "Cover the bill, will you?" For a second, I thought it was a joke. A poorly timed one, maybe, but still a joke. I waited for the punchline. It never came. The waiter appeared beside the table, placing the leather folder down gently, already assuming the role I had been assigned. My sister snorted, eyes sparkling with amusement. "Still as clueless as ever," she said. "How cute." Something cold settled in my stomach. I slid into the empty chair slowly, my gaze drifting over the remnants of their meal, half-eaten desserts, expensive wine, dishes I hadn't even known they liked. No one asked why I was late. No one saved me a plate. No one apologized. Because this had been planned. As my mother chatted about how wonderful the food had been, it dawned on me with uncomfortable clarity, I hadn't been invited to dinner at all. I had been invited to arrive after it was over. I was the closing act. The wallet. The afterthought. I looked down at my phone again, rereading the message from that morning. Don't be late. The words took on a new meaning, sharp and mocking. I wasn't late. I was right on time, for exactly what they wanted from me. And for the first time, instead of shrinking under the weight of it, I felt something else rise quietly inside me. Once you notice a pattern, you can't unsee it. As I sat there, staring at the untouched place setting in front of me, memories began stacking on top of one another, forming a picture I had spent years trying not to look at too closely. This dinner wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding or poor timing. It was simply the latest version of something I had lived with my entire life. Growing up, my sister was the miracle and I was the margin. She was praised for trying. I was expected to succeed quietly. When she forgot her wallet, someone covered for her. When I forgot mine once in college, my mother sighed and reminded me how irresponsible I was. If my sister needed help, the family rallied. If I needed help, I was told I was strong enough to handle it on my own. Strength, I learned, was just another word for convenient. At birthdays, my gifts were practical, things I could use, things that saved them money. At my sister's birthdays, the room glittered with surprises. When I protested, even gently, I was told not to be dramatic. "You always make things uncomfortable," my mother would say. The waiter cleared another glass from the table, snapping me back to the present. My father barely looked up from his phone. My sister twirled a strand of hair, clearly enjoying herself. The bill sat between us like a quiet accusation. I watched my mother laugh, remembering how often that same laugh followed my discomfort. When I covered group expenses. When I drove everyone home. When I rearranged my schedule to accommodate theirs. I had been trained for this role. Even when I started earning more than either of them, the expectations didn't change. In fact, they grew. I became the emergency fund. The backup plan. The one who wouldn't mind. "You're good with money," my father would say, as if that explained everything. What he meant was, "You're easier to use than your sister." I glanced at the receipt again. The amount was high, intentionally so. They hadn't ordered like people paying for themselves. They had ordered like people confident someone else would clean up afterward. And they were right. Because I always had. Until now. A strange calm settled over me as the realization fully formed. This wasn't about dinner. It was about hierarchy. About reminding me of my place whenever I started to forget it. About making sure I stayed useful, compliant, predictable. I felt embarrassed, not because of the bill, but because of how long it had taken me to see the truth. I had mistaken tolerance for love. Silence for peace. Compliance for family harmony. My sister leaned over the table, lowering her voice. "You're not going to make a scene, right?" I met her eyes and smiled faintly. "No," I said. She relaxed, assuming I meant what I always meant. But for the first time, my silence wasn't submission. It was observation. And patterns, once recognized, lose their power. I didn't know yet how the evening would end, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that it wouldn't end the way it always had. Not this time. The bill lay on the table like a dare. I didn't reach for it right away. Instead, I studied it the way you study something that finally explains years of confusion. The numbers were too neat, the choices too deliberate: premium wine, shared appetizers, desserts ordered with the easy confidence of people who never planned to pay. My mother leaned back in her chair, satisfied. My sister tapped her nails against her phone, already bored now that her entertainment had peaked. My father cleared his throat. "Well," he said. "You can expense it, can't you?" Something shifted inside me then, not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet click, like a lock turning. I remembered other moments, stacked neatly behind this one. The time they asked me to cover a vacation rental and promised to reimburse me later. They never did. The time my sister ordered the most expensive item on the menu and smiled when the check came. The countless times I'd told myself it's easier this way. I looked at the clock on the wall. 8:27. They had timed this perfectly. The invitation. The urgency. "Don't be late." Not because they wanted me there, but because they wanted to make sure I arrived after everything was done. Late enough to be useful. Early enough not to refuse. My mother noticed my stillness and frowned. "What's taking so long?" I met her gaze. "I'm just thinking." My sister laughed softly. "About what?" "About how I'd mistaken obligation for love. About how easy it is to use someone who's been trained not to say no." I pushed my chair back slightly and stood. "I need to speak to the manager," I said, my voice calm enough to surprise even me. The reaction was immediate. My sister's smile faltered. "Why would you do that?" My father's tone sharpened. "Sit down. Don't embarrass us." Embarrass us. There it was, the final piece. This was never about money. It was about control. About reminding me, in public, that I existed to smooth things over. To pay quietly. To keep the image intact. "I'll be right back," I said, already turning away. Behind me, my mother hissed my name in warning. For once, I didn't stop. The manager listened patiently as I explained, his expression shifting from neutral to concerned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated facts. "I arrived after the meal ended," I said. "I didn't order anything. I was invited under the impression this was dinner, not the check." He nodded slowly. Understood. When we returned to the table, something in the air had changed. My parents sensed it. My sister's leg bounced nervously under the table. The manager addressed them politely. I just need to clarify, who is responsible for the bill? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. I watched their faces carefully, recognizing the flicker of fear beneath their indignation. And in that moment, standing there with nothing left to lose, I understood something powerful. I had never been powerless. I had just been compliant. And compliance, once withdrawn, changes everything. The question hung in the air like a held breath. Who is responsible for the bill? The manager's voice was calm, professional, utterly indifferent to family dynamics. He didn't care about history or hierarchy, only facts. That alone felt like a small miracle. My mother recovered first. She always did. Well, she said with a tight smile, gesturing vaguely in my direction, she was invited. She's family. The manager nodded once. Being invited doesn't determine payment, ma'am. Ordering does. My sister shifted in her seat. This is ridiculous, she snapped. She always pays. The word always echoed in my head. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I simply watched as the weight of their assumption began to collapse under its own arrogance. The manager turned to me. Did you order anything this evening? No, I said evenly. I arrived after the meal was finished. He nodded again, already reaching a conclusion. I'll need payment from the guests who dined, he said, placing the bill back on the table, this time squarely in front of my parents. The color drained from my mother's face. My father finally looked up, irritation flashing across his features. This is unnecessary, he said. We're regulars. And we appreciate that, the manager replied politely. But policy is policy. My sister stared at the total, her mouth parting slightly. Mom? My mother's hand trembled as she picked up the folder. For the first time, she looked at the number. For the first time, she realized I wasn't rescuing them. This is humiliating, she hissed, lowering her voice. Do you have any idea how this looks? I met her eyes calmly. About the same as it's always looked to me. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. She looked stunned, not because I'd refused to pay, but because I'd spoken at all. They scrambled after that. Credit cards were declined. A heated whisper passed between my parents. My sister suddenly remembered she'd left her wallet in the car. No one laughed anymore. Other diners glanced over, curiosity flickering in their eyes. And me? I stood there quietly, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to joy. When the payment was finally processed, the manager thanked them and turned to me. Is there anything else I can help you with? Yes, I said softly. Could you bring me a glass of water? My mother stared at me, incredulous. I took my time drinking it. Then I picked up my coat. I'm heading out, I said. No apologies. No explanations. I walked past their table as they sat in stunned silence, their anniversary reduced to an awkward memory they couldn't rewrite. Outside, the night air felt cool and clean against my skin. I paused for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. The sweetest revenge wasn't their embarrassment. It was the realization settling deep in my bones. I was no longer available to be used. And that changed everything.